Hi, I'm Ross, you're watching The Gastronomer, and today we are sharpening our knives. Alright, so first things first, this thing right here, this is a honing steel. This will not sharpen your knives. Now, I recommend you have one of them. I also recommend you pull this out of your drawer every time you pull your knife out of the drawer, but it's used for honing the knife and not sharpening the knife. It's an important distinction. I think of it like using a pair of scissors to cut your hair and using maybe a comb to straighten your hair. What this honing steel is doing is it's taking any of the steel particles that come out of whack as you chop, and it's just pushing them back into whack. That's very different than, say, sharpening your knife with a whetstone. You're actually taking steel off of the knife to create a new edge. This I probably bought for, I don't know, 8, 10, 12 bucks off Amazon. I'll put a link below. And it's something that I keep in my drawer next to my knives, and every time I pull out one of my knives, I pull out the honing steel and give it a couple swipes just to hone the steel back into the knife. It's gonna make it feel sharper even though it's not sharpening my knife. An easy way to use this thing when you first start is just hold it up and down like this, and you're gonna give it a couple swipes in this type of motion, and then you're good. Now, when you're thinking about doing this, I want you to think about two things. First of all, is you want to hone the whole knife from the back to the tip of the point. And second, you want to do it at about a 12-degree angle, just like this. How do I think about what 12 degrees really looks like? I know what 90 degrees looks like, right? Which is this. I can cut that in half to about 45 degrees. I can cut that in half again to about 22.5 degrees. And then I can cut that in half one more time to, I think that's 12.25, but anywhere around there is totally fine. You don't have to be exact. Another way to think about it is a matchbook. The angle of a matchbook happens to be about the same angle you want to hone and sharpen your knives with. It's that sort of 12 degrees. So if you think about that angle right there, just think about what a matchbook looks like. All right, so to sharpen our knife, we're gonna use a whetstone. This whetstone was, I think, 10 bucks. I'll put a link below. And what it is it's a stone. I think it might be, I don't know, pumice. And you can see two numbers on it, 1,000 and 400. 400, and these are grits like sandpaper. 400 is the coarser grit, which we're gonna start with, and 1,000 is the finer grit, which we're gonna finish with. Professional knife sharpening kits that, say, a professional chef would use have much more selection of grits, all the way up to, say, 5 or even 10,000, which for our purposes and the quality of knives we have is really just overkill. The 400 and 1,000 is fine for me. So the first step here is we are going to take our whetstone and we are going to wet the stone. So very easily, all I'm gonna do is take a tub of water. I'm gonna put my stone in there. And what I'll see, this stone is porous, so I'll see bubbles coming up out of the stone. And I'm gonna leave it for, I don't know, about 5 minutes. If you leave it for 10 or 15, that's totally fine. We just want it sufficiently wet, so when we sharpen our knife, we have some nice water between the blade and the steel and the actual stone. All right, while we're letting that soak, I wanna talk about how you can test your knives. A lot of people like to use what they call the tomato test. As you're sharpening, you can just drag your knife alongside a ripe tomato. Tomatoes are probably the hardest thing to cut because they're very soft inside and they have this thick skin on the outside. Some people like to use a serrated knife to cut it. I prefer just a really sharp chef's knife. But another easier way to do it if you don't want to waste tomatoes is to just use a piece of paper. What you can see here, and these knives are really dull, is I can certainly cut a piece of paper if I'm sawing like that, but you want to use sort of a shave test like that. And what you can see if you look really closely is that this cut sort of has jagged edges. And you have to think about when you're cutting food, you're doing the same thing. You have these jagged edges, which, as this is not even working because my knives are so dull, which once we sharpen it, what you'll see is we're gonna get a much cleaner cut once we sharpen this, and we'll get rid of those jagged edges, which will make for much less pressure that we have to apply when we're cutting things, it will also just make for a nice clean edge on the food that we're cutting. I think one of the things that I definitely make sure I have a sharp knife for is once I've seared a nice steak, cooked my steak, and slice it, if you don't have a really sharp knife, it's just gonna feel sort of weird in your mouth. All right, so I've waited about 5 minutes and now my whetstone is wet. I'm gonna take it out of the water here. I'm just gonna place it on my towel. And this towel is gonna do two things for us. One, it's gonna give us some traction so that as we sharpen, it's not gonna slide across the table. And two, it's gonna protect the countertop from actually getting damaged by the knife. This is soapstone, and I don't wanna cut directly on it. I don't wanna accidentally sort of slice into my countertop because it's gonna actually take out pieces of my countertop, and that's never a good thing. Now, let me make sure that I'm starting on the right side. I'm gonna start on the 400 side. And remember that angle we used when we were using the honing steel? We're gonna do the same thing here. So we're gonna draw the knife across the whetstone at about a 12-degree angle. And the important thing to think about here is we wanna sharpen both sides of the knife with even pressure and with the same number of strokes, because we want the blade of our knife to be an even angle on both sides. So I'm simply going to drag my knife across the whetstone. And then I'm actually gonna flip it over. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Now, how do you know when you wanna flip over to the finer side? You really don't. What I tend to have found in my experience is that 7, 8, 9, 10 times on this side tends to be good. I would say it also depends on how dull your knife is. If you haven't sharpened your knife ever, you're gonna need to do this a whole bunch of times, and I highly recommend you actually look down the knife and tend to look for burrs on the knife or look for places where it's out of whack. If it's still out of whack, don't hesitate. And I'm actually just gonna put a little bit more water on this to keep it wet. This can get messy. If it's out of whack, don't under sharpen it here. Now when you're doing this, a good question is how much pressure to actually apply to the whetstone with your knife. And the rule of thumb from the knife experts is 5 to 8 pounds of pressure. Now what the heck does that mean? Well, it's not something I can really describe to you. The easiest way to feel what 5 to 8 pounds of pressure is like is to actually take the scale from your bathroom, put it on your countertop, maybe clean your countertop first or clean your scale first, and just turn it on and then press with your hand until you see 5 to 8 pounds on the display. That'll give you a good sense of what 5 to 8 pounds of pressure really feels like under your hand. Now that I've done that, I'm gonna switch over to the finer side. Add a little bit more water to my whetstone. So you wanna just keep it wet. You can't have it too wet, but you definitely can have it too dry. The same thing. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Now I'm drawing it back across the whetstone. Some people like to draw it forward. Some people like to go back and forth. I find actually just going back and forth and counting and applying even pressure, just too many things to do at once. So as I like to go back, it's just a simple method that I suggest you start with. So now that my knife is sharp, I can do that same paper test here. And as I cut into the paper, and as I drag it along the paper, I can see that I have a much, much smoother cut. I can't really see any jagged edges and that knife is sharp. Now one last step here, I wanna wash this off under cold running water. As I've sharpened my knife, I've taken steel off of the blade, and while I have these gray striations showing the steel is sticking there, I also do have some steel remnants which have probably stuck to the blade that I don't want to eat. So make sure that you just wash this off before you use it. All right, so I hope you learned something there. I highly recommend you spend the 20 or 30 bucks to pick yourself up a whetstone, pick yourself up a honing steel, and try this at home. In fact, Father's Day is coming up, and this right here would make a great gift for dad for under 50 bucks. It's a fun skill to have. It's something that you can work on and craft over time, impresses your friends, and just makes your food all around better. So try it out, enjoy. Let's see if I can do a little fruit ninja here. Not really.